I want to take you on a short tour of the harbour.
The port was the concern of the citizens of Bristol. Today, through the corporation which owns it on their behalf. In those days, through the vigour and ingenuity of the Society of Merchant Venturers. They were men of foresight. The best of them knew that the tidal quays of the Avon and Frome were no longer enough for the ever bigger ships of the Atlantic trade. They thrashed out plan after plan before they finally adopted the brilliant scheme of William Jessup, which gave Bristol its modern shape, transforming what used to be an alarmingly tidal harbour into a dock system of constant depth. Once, that harbour was the whole port. Today, it is only a section of it, the section known as the city docks. And although these docks are the historic part of the port, thanks to the 18th century planners, they have been able to keep up with the times. And their only limitation is the length of vessel they can handle.
It was the docks that formed the basis of Bristol's prosperity. Ships sailed from here to search for new lands, and in due course to trade all over the world in almost everything we can think of, but especially wine, rum, tobacco, and sugar.
The issue of it being a tidal river, of course, was that when the boats and the ships got all the way into the city centre and moored up in the city, when the water went back out again, they were stranded in the city centre until the next high tide. This gave rise to the expression ship-shape Bristol fashion.
The highest approval an old-time seaman could give to a job well and truly done was to say that it was ship-shape and Bristol fashion.
Take away your hats here. Anything else? 380.
That's me.
Yes, but to dig 2 miles or more of new channel for the Avon, that's a formidable enterprise.
Surely. But consider, my friend, would you lose all our trade to these Liverpool merchants? As I see it, we have no choice but to be bold.
You also have a huge number of people living on boats that are not on residential moorings, they are on leisure moorings, and they essentially illegally live on their boats and they're not supposed to. And it's a kind of it's a well-known phenomenon that there's a huge number more people living in the harbour than are supposed to.
Jessup's plan turned the old riverbed into the floating harbour by impounding it with locks and diverting the Avon along a man-made bed, the New Cut. Bristol's other river, the Frome, flowed into the floating harbour under the modern city centre. The Frome's bed, too, is man-made. Enterprising Bristolians moved it here in the early Middle Ages, creating Broad Quay, which remained in use to within living memory till the city centre was built. In general, it's the continental and coastwise trade that comes to city docks, while the bulk of longer-range vessels goes to Avonmouth docks, but only because of size.
They keep it as close to zero as they can. Part of the reason for that is if you think about the boats that are moored around the harbour, if you come in when it's plus 50 and you tie up on a mooring and you give yourself a fairly taut mooring line and then they drop to the water level by a metre, you'd be a fairly angry boat owner.
Repairing and restoring all the many and varied crafts that you find in the harbour has become an industry in itself. And everywhere there's plastic, reinforced plastic, acres of it. I wonder what Hillhouse and Brunel would have made of all that.
So they looked at ways of engineering the ships and then they turned their attention to how could they engineer the waterways in Bristol to better improve Bristol's standing as a port. When we first put scaffolding on these buildings, we had a lot of people contacting us because the anxiety that it was going to be turned into a flats development, because that's what people see happening around the harbour. The weirdest one I ever had was a woman who contacted who claimed she'd heard a rumour that we were being converted into a nightclub. Some of the issues you get are things like the depth of the harbour. The depth of the harbour, it no longer gets dredged to the same depth that it was when it was a working dock. So I believe it's now dredged to sort of at the deepest point about 6 metres, I think. And at one point it would have been more like 10, 15, 20 metres. For me, the biggest worry is the dry dock. Right. The idea of that not coming back into use as a dry dock. I really hope it does.
Long years ago, the little ships ventured from the ancient city of Bristol for lands unknown and undeveloped. Today and every day, ploughing along the shipping lanes of the world are vessels of all types, liners and tramps, carrying cargo to and from this modern port of Bristol.
At that rate, it would have taken more than 25 years to build a monster like this one. Still, it's good to see that the modern port can at least accommodate ships this size, and there's even a dry dock built in 1908 in which she can be repaired.
The last time it was dredged was October 2015. Bristol no longer retains its own fleet of dredgers, so they hire in dredgers as and when they need to. But it doesn't need to be as deep as it used to be. If you think about the size of some of the vessels, the last commercial ship, the Miranda Guinness, which left in the 1970s, you think about the size of that versus the size of the Bristol ferries, you're not talking about anywhere near the same size of vessel.
There were 10 more shipyards around this area at one time in the last century. The Albion Dockyard, which opened in 1820, is now the last one. Still, it's nice to see that all around me there are ships and boats of all sizes being worked on, and you can see all the main types of construction that have been used in shipbuilding over the last 200 years in the yard. Those houses over there are on Baltic Wharf and Canada Wharf. They were once the site of the largest timber yards in the whole of the dock area. The names give us a reminder of where the timber came from. Fleets of ships were kept busy all the year round fetching this timber. They had special hatches in the bows so the logs could be passed out of the holes straight into the water of the harbour. It was quite common to see huge rafts of timber floating in the harbour until the end of the last century, when wooden shipbuilding died out altogether.
I'm Nicola Murdoch. I'm the Chief Exec here at the Water Sports Centre. We are a Water Sports Centre, but we're a registered charity primarily, specifically because of the groups that we work with. We do pretty much the whole range of water sports. So we've got rowing, sailing. Sailing is our biggest thing. Historically, it's the thing we've done for the longest as well. More recently, rowing, kayaking, canoeing, stand-up paddleboarding. The theme that runs through all of those sports is disabled sport, disabled activity. So our programme that we run on a Tuesday after school club and a Saturday morning is a thing called Sailability. It says Sailability, but it's actually all our sports, but the brand is Sailability. And that's where we work specifically with people with fairly extreme and complex needs, and we can get them out on the water. We've got hoists where we hoist people out of wheelchairs and into boats, regardless of their physical abilities. Anyone can get on the water. We've got boats that can be sailed by just breathing into a pipe or based on hydraulics and pressure. We've got kayaks that have got stabilisers, rowing boats that have got stabilisers. We've got all sorts of boats that just won't capsize. Even I can't capsize one, and I'm a terrible sailor. We also deliver courses, so we're an accredited training centre as well, so we can award people things like their Powerboat 2 licence, their RYA level 1, 2, 3. We can do all sorts of accredited training as well, and we do shore-based courses, so things like first aid, safeguarding training, and a lot of the courses we run have theoretical elements to them, so we need classrooms. The 2 cormorants that live in here, there's one on the buoy there now, and they live here. And if they're here, there's fish. They wouldn't live here if they weren't. Yeah. So you know that they're about and they're pretty happy. This end of the docks is definitely quieter than the other end. I think that we're still a pretty well kept secret in Bristol. That's not a good thing. I wish more people did know about us. That said, this centre has grown very, very quickly. There is nowhere else that they could have it this close to the water in Bristol. There isn't another space like this. So that's why if we took it over, the majority of what we do, that has to remain exactly as it is, but we could stack more in here by using their higher stacking system, and being able to manoeuvre the boats around. I think we could be a lot cleverer about how that happens.
And Brunel went back to the original designs for the floating harbour that were put together by a chap called William Jessup, and Jessup had never intended the overfall dam to be the only way of dealing with the water. He'd intended both an overfall and, hence our name, an underfall, so that you'd be taking water out over the top to deal with the water and at the bottom to deal with the silt. It's a bit like if you think about a sink.
Bristol ships had to be well built to cope with the River Avon. Like some of our old harbours, this one is several miles inland. The tides in the River Avon are some of the highest and the most ferocious in the world, so they didn't say shipshape and Bristol fashion for nothing.
I'm also a member of a rowing club that rows out of here. We don't have a clubhouse. We don't have anywhere that we keep anything. We just leave everything out in the open. There are other clubs, like there's the canoe club who's behind us. The sailing club are also behind us here in this building. None of them have got a building where they can have committee meetings or can get together for social events. So it's kind of having a shared space where there's some agreement. There'd have to be some agreement somewhere. I don't know what that would look like yet on who gets access to what on which days, or times on each day. And then they have a space where they can store their own equipment and their own kit. or agreed discounts for use of space, things like that. So like reciprocal agreements really, but it just gives everyone somewhere that they can then call their home.
Shipbuilding is no longer the major industry in Bristol that it used to be.
Harbour is essentially used as a system to manage that water that's coming into Bristol, and we have also the design of Underford Yard. We've got a retaining wall around the outside of the yard which curves round, and then if you look here, our car park gate is on a slope going down towards the harbour with an open edge on the harbour's quay wall, so that any floodwater from the new cut gets funneled through our car park gate and into the new cut.
Altogether, over 5.5 million tonnes of goods pass through the port each year. 3.5 million in foreign trade and over 2 million coastwise.
It only opens when boats need to come through. So tall boats coming into the harbour have to book in with the Harbour Master's office, and they have to book in for a swing bridge. And I think they have to give, I don't know if it's 24 or 48 hours notice if they need to come through. So once they've booked to come through and they know that they have to swing for them, then they will go and operate it. So if you can pick up tide timetables from the Harbour Master's office, and it will show you like when in the day the tides are.
And in my lifetime, there's been several ships have been grounded and turned over when the tide's gone out. And one of them was a ship called the Ettrick. And I can remember there were a lot of boots on there. Yes. And all these boots floated out, and people were scrambling down onto the mud and getting the boots.
I've said goodbye to sweethearts, wives and friends, and down the marsh we've sailed away to wind through Avon's bend. I've been to sea for 20 years, I've sailed to Eastern Cape, but now I want to stay in port and a home in Bristow make. So bind me to the buttered mate, don't lash me to the mast, for I do the tail to Klondike North, and we got to get her fast.
Brunel's SS Great Britain was another part of his grand scheme to link up London and New York through Bristol. Most importantly, she was built of iron, and she was fitted with a propeller, so becoming the world's first iron-built,
She was the first ship
ocean-going
to sail the
propeller
Atlantic in
driven
14 days. She was the first ship to use steel rigging. She was the first ship to use screw propulsion. Really, she was at least 50
Here
years
is part
ahead
of what's called the Harbourside Project, a large-scale development site along the floating harbour, surrounding the Lloyd's building just below the city centre. 5 landowners joined forces last March to work on ways of breathing new life into Bristol's dockland.